Hey there, gamers. DreamcastGuy here. Today we're going to talk about a very controversial leak that is currently going very, very viral, and people are not happy about it. So, obviously, the game that everybody wants remade more than anything else is Bloodborne. Obviously, the FromSoftware classic that was a PlayStation 4 exclusive. This game came out once. It got some DLC. It never got any performance patches. It's stuck at 30 FPS. It never got a remaster, anything like that. People have been begging specifically for a Bloodborne remake for like decades, right? But apparently, according to this leak, not once, but twice, Bluepoint Games sat down and started production. They started actually making a Bloodborne remake, and Sony stopped them. This is a very big leak. Now, I want to start this with a lot of caveats because people are actually legitimately screaming at the leaker, claiming this is fake news, you're a liar, you suck. And I want to go through the criticisms before the leak itself, because I think that if this is legit, PlayStation is in a very bad spot. But if this is true, it's kind of just an interesting look as to how bad a good business can be run. Let's get into it. Hi, hope you're having a great day. If you could please give this video a like and subscribe if you haven't already. So, this is coming from Detective Seeds. You can see that Detective Seeds follows me on Twitter. I've actually done some podcasting with the dude, talked to him frequently. He's a pretty cool dude, but when it comes to his leaks, his track record is spotty. Some of his stuff has been very, very legit, but at the same time, he has gotten some very crucial info very provably wrong. And so because of it, he's actually banned at a lot of places. People actually talk about the fact that this dude is not allowed to post anything on gaming leaks and rumors. He's not allowed anywhere on like resetera and stuff. He's one of the few sources that's actually pretty much banned on a lot of the leaking areas. And a lot of this like criticism is coming from the fact that this is a very long, very in-depth mega leak, which typically just doesn't happen. The first red flag that a lot of people are discussing, a lot of other leakers are saying this seems a bit strange, is that it being so hyper-specific. Like this guy here, Kiwi Talks, this guy actually is a dude who does hundreds and hundreds of developer interviews. He gets a chance to sit down and talk to people, and he says that this is either stuff he's completely making up or he could be being fed false information, because this is the thing. Once you're getting leaks, a lot of times you have to be vague because they can track down who leaked it. This has serious, mostly times, career-ending implications, including the fact that they'll literally sometimes fine you, fire you at the very least if you break your NDA. Now, I have done my own tiny bits of leaking here and there, and the main reason I stopped doing leaks is that a lot of times the stuff they say to you, you don't want to get people fired. I mean, I like developers. I'm glad they're making games. It's very hard sometimes to like vaguely talk about things you've heard, especially because sometimes they're very, very specific. I knew somebody at one point that worked at a, let's say a mocap studio, and they saw stuff that they weren't supposed to see, and they would tell it to me, and I just couldn't talk about it. Because if I said, hey, this actor is working on this project, it's very obvious who was actually seeing that, and they would definitely get fired. So this guy is basically saying that if this is legit, it is a bit off. Also, Jason Schreier saying that something about this seems a bit off. Jason Schreier obviously has maybe the best leaker track record ever in leaker history. He is saying that from what he knows, Bloodborne Remake was not pitched. Okay, we've got the caveats out of the way. Let's take this for entertainment value. I think that sometimes there have actually been mega leaks like this that end up being very, very true. And usually they're done by incredibly pissed off workers. You know, people that are like, all right, you know what? I'm burning it to the ground. I've been working on this thing for 5 years. They walked in, told me to pack my box. My life's work is destroyed. I got to restart somewhere else. I'm going to post email leaks, crazy chains of communication, stuff the public is not supposed to know. And a lot of times often shouldn't see. So this is the thing. 4 days ago, he did a big post saying he talked to 2 developers inside of Bluepoint, and after that went kind of viral. This sort of popped up, a more thorough thing. I've now spoke to 4 Bluepoint employees, and this is their story on their timeline, dates and code names for projects. So I want to go through this because it shows the fact that honestly, in a lot of ways, Sony doesn't really understand, if this is legit, Sony really doesn't understand how to make money, or they just really don't understand how to make money properly. And what I mean by that is that Sony, by their own like financial reports, is making like tens of billions of dollars purely off third-party stuff. You know, Fortnite microtransactions, Marvel rival skins, and full-priced games. People buying GTA 6 and stuff. That makes so much money because, I mean, PlayStation 5 is the biggest console on the planet. People are buying it so much that literally, basically every game that sells, that becomes Sony bucks, right? So it sounds like they're in a spot where they're almost sort of forgetting the secret sauce of making good exclusives on their own. But let me start with this. So this leads up to the beginning of the acquisition of Bluepoint Games. Into 2020, Bluepoint ships Demon's Souls remake, and talks begin a Sony acquisition and working on more original projects. Sony did not think that remakes and remasters made enough money, and some people within Bluepoint and Sony wanted to branch out. Now, this has been corroborated by other leaks. The fact that Bluepoint did at some point want to start doing original stuff because they had made pretty much only remakes. They actually have done everything from the Nathan Drake collection to the God of War Saga trilogy and stuff that came out on PlayStation 3. These were the remake people. And they're basically saying that, okay, this is great, but to be like creatively fulfilled, we'd like to make our own stuff as well, right? All heard that Shadow of the Colossus remake lost money, but it was assumed it would. But Shuhei Yoshida wanted to preserve that game. That to me is a big surprise. Shadow of the Colossus remake seemed like it sold pretty good. I guess it didn't. Shadow of the Colossus remake, biggest criticism was the new face on the main character. However, Ueda wanted to look that way and designed it. There were conversations about doing add-on content for the remake, including doing new original content and growing design department. It was assumed in the studio that Bluepoint Games to be making Bloodborne after Demon's Souls. Bluepoint had a design department of about 1 to 2 people, was not sufficient for a full project. Now, this typically means that there's a lot of people that are coding, programming, making stuff, concept artists and stuff, but the design department is typically the people that are kind of like guiding the project. And typically, for remake studios, a tiny design team isn't the biggest shock, but if this is real, I mean, under 10 seems psychopathically tiny, right? But here's the thing, 2021. In early 2021, after Demon's Souls, studio staff assumed they'd work on Bloodborne and start to prepare. However, they were not given the green light due to internal politics of Bloodborne, involving a fragile relationship with FromSoft, Sony, and the original IP. Now, there have been rumblings about this, that to some degree, FromSoftware loves always making new stuff. FromSoftware really appreciates just flooding forward and making stuff like Elden Ring, right? Giant, crazy, different projects. Now you're getting Armored Core 6. Now you're getting this and that. They're a game studio that loves just rushing into a project and figuring it out. And they're, undoubtedly, they're very, very gifted at that, right? Well, to me, it wouldn't be a big shock if Sony legally owns the rights to Bloodborne, but I have a feeling that they probably didn't want to do it unless FromSoftware is involved to some degree, whether they got lent a director or some sort of like marketing deal or something like that. Maybe they were just like, we're done with Bloodborne. You guys own it. You guys do it. And maybe that made them sort of gun shy, that they were like, all right, we don't want to deal with all the complications and intricacies of sorting this mess out. Bloodborne was pulled from the table and Bluepoint had no project. Bluepoint was assigned to help with God of War Ragnarok support due to Sony Santa Monica needing some help and a combo of other factors. Now, everybody knows this. They're actually in the credits of that game, and a lot of people think that that support helped Ragnarok actually not get an extra delay. Jim Ryan was really pushing live service hard, and Sony had a desire to evolve, making God of War into an Assassin's Creed style franchise. If this is true, well, we know the first half is true, Jim Ryan's obsession with live service, but the idea of trying to turn God of War into an Assassin's Creed style franchise with maybe semi-annual games that take place in different mythologies, different pantheons, different characters, that seems like such a stupid idea to me. I feel like something that Sony does good, and maybe you'll disagree, is that they don't water down their characters, right? They actually release a new game when it's actually time, right? If you're getting a new Nathan Drake adventure, it's actually a good Nathan Drake adventure. You know, here's Kratos. You care about that story of Kratos. We're not getting 50 spin-offs and weird time travel stories. It's always very, very focused, right? But it's interesting that it sounds like to some degree they're like, all right, we got to make money, boys. We actually have to do something here, right? Bluepoint was not allowed to make a game with Kratos as Sony Santa Monica did not trust Bluepoint with that, and it would be too expensive. That's super weird. September 30th, Bluepoint is bought by Sony. Now, I guess this is a part that's kind of hard to swallow. Like, just the idea that somehow having Kratos would hurt the Bluepoint brand or hurt the God of War brand, that to me just seems so absurd, to say the least. So they're also saying it'd be too expensive to put Kratos into the game. Very odd. Bluepoint is acquired and tasked with coming up with an original project in the God of War universe. The catch is that they needed to stretch the content, but Bluepoint employees did not know at the time that it's going to be live service. A gamble was made by convincing Sony to buy us instead of looking for us to get funding elsewhere. After the acquisition, there was a culture change within Bluepoint. Now, this to me, I feel like this is the part I don't really believe, which is that I cannot imagine. I hear this in studio talk sometimes that you're like given the guideline of your next project, but they're not clear enough about what it's supposed to be. But I have trouble wrapping my head around the idea of them saying you're making the next God of War. It's got to be big, 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 but not mentioning its live service from the very, very start. I feel like that's really setting them up to fail. 2022, prototyping begins for Demon's Souls meets God of War, also called CP13. Bluepoint staff were not initially told the game was live service. Bluepoint still had minimal design team. Bluepoint did not have a game director for this project, was promised one on loan from Sony Santa Monica, and a couple designers once Ragnarok shipped. Brother, they had a whole year working on this with no director. No idea what the project was going to be, and no knowledge that it was live service. This to me is difficult for me to believe, just because I can't imagine that somebody somewhere on the ladder wasn't like in charge of this project. It's that if this is true, like PlayStation is so terribly mismanaged, which honestly could be legit. There is a lot of talks about Xbox having a very similar problem of studios that are basically just forgotten in the giant wash of crap they're trying to put out. But an entire year literally doing basically nothing but concept art is a wild, wild accusation. Next up, into 2022, Sony Santa Monica game director and designers joined the team. A lot of time was spent prototyping, but the mesh between these two studios did not go as well, as they were not familiar with Bluepoint's engine, fully remote work due to the obviously lockdowns, and hiring freezes at Sony. Very soon after Sony Santa Monica folks showed up, Bluepoint staff learned that the game they were having to make was a live service game, and they needed to work with what they had. Oh my God, this like almost hurts my brain. If this is legit, this is like, imagine you're already like 2 years into a project. A year and a half into a project. And now they're telling you, by the way, this is live service slop. Oh my God. Internal issues begin to arise, and those on the board with live service were the head shed. What does this even mean? Were the head shed. I have no idea what that's supposed to mean. At Sony Santa Monica, Sony and Bluepoint. So basically, everybody at the top was happy with it, but everybody actually working on it wasn't. It was unclear whether Bluepoint leadership believed in the project or just doing their best to salvage morale. About 75% of the staff employees, according to sources, were against this move and pushed back against making a live service. This to me is interesting, and I feel like that probably is legit, just because I have heard that in a lot of studios, from my own conversations with developers here and there, people do not like the idea of live service for like a bunch of different reasons. You don't get a typical ship. Your project is basically forever. You're dealing with what do they call it? Feature bloat. Feature bloat is apparently a huge problem, which is that, all right, we need to make a crafting system. Okay, that means we need to put materials in the map. Okay, that means the map needs to be bigger. Okay, but now we need to put microtransaction. Okay, so now we have to design clothes that look extra cool, and the cosmetics got to be able to overwrite the crafting system, right? Feature bloat is where you keep tacking stuff on and on and on and on forever to keep like the prospective fan base addicted. After deadlines were not hit, internal strife from employees, the project was canceled in early 2025. Bluepoint Games begins pitching projects to Sony. They pitched a Jak and Daxter remake, a Resistance remake. Oh my God, I would have loved that. Shadow of the Colossus remaster, bringing the PlayStation 4 game to PlayStation 5 and adding in new bosses. The Bloodborne remake was again pitched. A small portion of the team worked on it for 2 or 3 months, but Sony pulled the plug. It was never officially greenlit, but they were deep in negotiations, and Bluepoint thought they would be able to make it. So this happens pretty frequently from what I've heard of. And usually it goes halfway decent. Usually if you're working on something, you can kind of get stuff like, if you have like a pretty good prototype, they're much more likely to greenlight it, at least more development of it. Famously, World of Warcraft Classic actually had this. The people at the top of Blizzard didn't think you could even make a version of Classic that ran today because they were missing so much code, but a guy named Omar Rodriguez actually pretty much spent a month of his own time privately, literally got it up and running. He basically combined the current version of WoW and an old version of WoW and made like a weird homunculus. And so because of it, we now have like World of Warcraft Classic today literally exists because of like 2 or 3 passionate developers secretly working on it, right? But my point is the fact that it is interesting that whatever they saw, whatever Sony saw, they went, no, hell no. Instead, we got 2 new IPs and worked on some small pitches all under the CP13 folder, and then codenamed Black Fang was pitched. Black Fang was a Ghost of Tsushima spinoff that Sony liked. Sony gave Bluepoint 4 to 5 months to prototype it until the end of March to prove they could make it. Employees felt it was going okay, even though it was never officially greenlit and the track to hit a deadline. Employees found out February 19th they were being shut down and Project Black Fang was canceled. Studio's last day is March 2nd. It's worth noting that Bluepoint did use contractors. However, a majority of this were people that were in studio from shadow until shuttering. About 40 employees have been there the entire time, with the rest being contractors. This obviously has fluctuated with the retirements, deaths, and turnovers. According to all sources, people said stayed at Bluepoint and wanted to continue to stay there. A sad story of such a wonderful group of talented artists. The thing about this that does feel the most true to me is that we have more and more sources that kind of talk about the unraveling of games development. That a lot of companies now are doing this, where you're trying to like build the road as you're running out of some materials, right? You're trying to drive, the car's on the tracks, everything's going good, and you're trying to just build and build and build until one day you're driving on gravel and you didn't even realize it. If this is legit, unfortunately, this timeline does make sense to me, of just the idea of them really trying to pitch tiny stuff, big stuff, anything. And Sony's like, okay. And then somebody at the top says they're not making enough money. Like the next remake, the next spinoff, the next project just isn't worth dumping an extra $100 million into. I think a lot about how Ghost of Tsushima 1 was made for $30 million and made like $300 million. It made like a 10x return on investment. And it just feels like Sony has forgotten how to do that, right? Tiny projects with still good graphics and still ambitious, but not, $1 trillion of investment. So if it's not the biggest game of all time, it flopped. And it feels like Sony has very much lost that magic. But in a way, I'll be honest, I'm rooting that this isn't true. I just don't like the idea that a Bloodborne remake was even possible and it got canned. Tell me your thoughts in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and please keep dreaming. Rest in peace, Bloodborne, man. Jesus. Thanks so much for watching that video. If you want to see something else, you can always click this link to see what I put up last, or, subscribe and see what's coming up next. Also, I promise that whatever I do, it'll try not to suck.